Okay, so guys, so tonight's lecture is going to be about Gaelic games, the GAA, so the Gaelic Athletic Association. And it's also going to be a little bit about the Celtic revival or the Gaelic revival of the 19th century. So there was a revival in things like literature, looking at Ireland's Gaelic past. There was a Celtic revival in art as well, not just in Ireland, but also in places like England and the United States. Celtic jewellery is quite popular these days, but that popularity kind of started off in the late 19th century as well. And then a revival of the Irish language as well took place around the same time. Okay, so hurling and Gaelic football. So these two games have been played in Ireland for centuries. So they've been, there are references to those games in Ireland from the first millennium AD. And then on the continent, Julius Caesar, when he invaded Rome, and he attacked Rome and, not when he invaded Rome, when he invaded Gallia or Gaul, modern day France. At that time, you know, the Gauls were Celtic speaking peoples. And he described in his book, Commentari, so in Julius Caesar's commentaries, he described a game that they played with a ball, a leather ball and sticks. And, you know, he described it as sort of almost like a war. So hurling existed from a very, very long time ago. Now, if you look at the stick, it kind of looks a little bit like hockey. But you'll see that the sticks in olden days look more like hockey sticks than they do today. But anyway, that is hurling, okay? And we're also going to be looking at the story of how Cuchulainn got his name, because Cuchulainn, he's one of the most famous Irish heroes in Irish mythology. And he was also known as a very good hurling player. So he grew up playing hurling. So there are many stories about him. Probably the most famous story in Irish mythology is Táin Bó Cúailnge, or the cattle raid of Cooley. And Cuchulainn is one of the main characters here. But we're going to look at the story of how Cuchulainn got his name. So we're going to have a look at that in a moment. But first of all, I just want to ask you, what do you know about these two sports? What do you know so far, can I ask, about hurling and Gaelic football?
I know, my kids play in GA.
Okay, and can you tell us some of the rules, Angela? How do you
It's very important about the Gaelic football, what they can use hands. They can keep the ball in the hands. For me, that was surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah, about rules in hurling, I really don't know, but I know about hurling.
Okay. So one other thing as well that's quite important is that in hurling, they can dribble with the ball. So the ball, unlike in hockey or in ice hockey, the ball can be held with your hand. You can't pick up the ball from the from the ground with your hand, but you can use the hurley to pick up the ball. Same in football, you can't pick up the ball in Gaelic football from the ground, but you can pick it up with your foot, so you can kick it up, essentially. And you can also run with the ball in your hand or on the stick for 4 steps. Does anyone know how you score? There are 2 types of ways of scoring in hurling and in Gaelic football. Does anybody know what they are?
No?
Okay, well, we're going to see a little sample of hurling now. So let's have a look at this. Hopefully, fingers crossed, this video will work. Okay, so this will kind of give you an idea of what hurling looks like. Now, I'm not going to be playing the sound on it, but you can see, right, that it is quite a physical sport, but it also takes an enormous amount of skill. You know, to catch the ball in the air, for example, especially with hurleys kind of flying around the place, and to score a goal. So a goal is worth 3 points. So if you put the ball into the net, you get 3 points. If you put the ball over the net, so over the bar, you get 1 point. Okay, so he's going to score, he's going to go and get a point. No, it's a goal actually again. But if it goes over that bar between the two sticks, then that is a point. Okay, so there are 3 points equal a goal. So that's the system. Now, the team that you see there in green is Limerick, and then in white and blue is Waterford. Limerick is the team that is the champion of All Ireland in the hurling at the moment. And Dublin is not so good at hurling. They're okay. Cork, historically, Cork along with Tipperary and Kilkenny are probably the strongest hurling counties. So some counties around Ireland have strong traditions of playing hurling, and other ones don't. Cork is one of the places that has a tradition of playing hurling, but it also has a tradition of playing Gaelic football. The only other county that's like that, that has a tradition of playing both hurling and Gaelic football to a high standard, is Galway. Now, Dublin may be able to do that in the future. Dublin are the current champions of Gaelic football in Ireland. They actually won the Gaelic football All-Ireland the last 6 years. So the first one they won in 2015 in their latest run, and they've won every championship since then. It might even be 2014 that they won their first one. So let's have a quick look at Gaelic football now as well. So bear with me there for a second.
Rob, can I ask you something?
Yeah, sure.
We have one game and we must to think what the score will be for next game in hurling. Yeah, and some people was put at 26.5 or 26.3. What mean 0.3 or 0.5?
Yeah, so the first number is the number of goals that a team gets, and then the second number is the number of points. So that would be a typical score, you know, would be like 3 goals and 2 points, or 3-12 to 4 goals and 18 points. So like if you imagine, if you get 1 goal and 9 points, and the other team gets let's say 3 goals and 3 goals and 3 points, then they would draw. The two of those teams would draw. So you can see football, right? It's basically the same, that if the ball goes over the bar, you get 3 points, you get 1 point, and then 3 points equals a goal. So Cork played in the hurling or in the football Munster final just last Sunday against Tipperary. Cork, you can see there, they're wearing the red jerseys on your screen at the moment. So they wear the same shirt or the same gear for hurling and football. but they lost, unfortunately, to Kerry. So that was a bit, or not to Kerry, to Tipperary. We looked at just those two videos that I just showed you were just to give you an idea of what the sports looked like. Now, those two sports are by far the two most popular sports in the game of hurling, or in Ireland, sorry. Now, I'm just going to send you a link, right, to a YouTube video. And the YouTube video is one that I prepared last night. And it's all this story about how Cuchulainn got his name. So I'm going to send you that link now. I'll just get it there from YouTube now. 1 second. Okay, I can't seem to find a video, so I will just do it myself. Okay, it's on YouTube, but it's kind of disappeared. Okay, so anyway, I can explain it to you on here just as well, I think. Okay, so hopefully you'll be able to see my screen now. Yeah, it looks like it's just sharing now at the moment. So anyway, we're going to talk about how this hero Cuchulainn got his name. So when the picture comes up there, you'll be able to see Cuchulainn holding a hurley. Now, hurley is the name of the stick, Hurley, and hurling with an ing at the end is the name of the sport. In Irish, we call the stick on cumann, and it's where you get the word for the Irish word is the word that gives the name to hurling for women, which is camogie. So that comes from cumann or cumanníocht, as we call it in the Irish language. So you can't seem to, can anybody see my screen? You probably can't, can you?
No.
It's sort of saying, okay. I'll try it one more time. Okay, I think you can see it now, hopefully. So anyway, Cuchulainn is the blonde kid there that you see on the screen, right? So he's this kind of great hero that's mentioned in a lot of Celtic mythology, in the old stories that we have, and stories that are still taught in the schools here. So maybe, Angela, your kids may have read about Cuchulainn in school if they went to primary school here.
Ask them.
Yeah, ask them, yeah. So anyway, Setanta was Cuchulainn's name when he was a child. So one day, a blacksmith by the name of Colin, he organized a great feast. Setanta got an invitation to go to this feast. So as he had lost track of time playing hurling, he was always out kind of playing hurling with his friends. Setanta ended up arriving late to the party. So when he arrived at Colin's fort, or Colin's house, a fort is kind of like a fortified dwelling place, he saw that there was a big fierce guard dog outside. Okay, so the dog attacked Satanta, and Satanta didn't have any sword or he didn't have any other weapons. All he had was he had the hurley and he had a slitzer as well. So slitzer is what we call the ball in hurling. Okay, so that they're the only two things that he had, and what he did is he decided to fire the ball, to hit the ball with the hurley, so to hit the slitter with the hurley at the dog, and he hit it very powerfully, and it went into the dog's throat, went down to the back of the dog's throat, and killed it instantly. So the animal fell dead on the ground. So obviously you can imagine, right, that Cullen, who had organized this feast, he wasn't too happy with Cuchulainn. And he said, "Who will guard my fort now?" to Cuchulainn, when he saw his prize guard dog dead on the ground. So Setanta said, "Look, I'll be your guard until you find a dog as great as the one that I've just killed." So he did so, and he carried the name Cuchulainn, or the guard dog of Cullen, from that day forward. Okay, so the reason that I'm mentioning this story connected with Gaelic games, right, is that this story is from the first millennium AD, and it's just to give you an idea how far back the game of hurling goes. So Celtic people have been playing that game, not just in Ireland, but also in other Celtic-speaking regions, such as Spain, Scotland, and in Gaul, or what used to be modern day France. And there's a game that they play like that, like hurling, up in Scotland, and they call it shinty. So that's still a fairly popular sport. It's very similar to hurling. And there's also a sport that is played on the continent, I believe in France, that is similar to hurling as well. So it's been around for a very, very long time. The story that I told you about how Cuchulainn got his name was first written down about 1000 of the Common Era. But the story existed in oral form, so it was passed on from generation to generation by word of mouth for at least a few hundred years before that. So here's an artist's depiction of Cuchulainn and the guard dog attacking him. And you can see he's got the slitzer, or the ball, which is kind of a hard leather ball, similar to the one that they play in baseball, in his left-hand hand. And then he's got the hurley in his right hand. So I think it would make a great film to tell the story of Cuchulainn's life. And also it might make hurling kind of more well-known, more popular in other countries. But it hasn't been seen in the cinema yet. The personality of Cuchulainn comes from the same source as Heracles or Hercules in the Greek and Roman traditions, respectively. So Cuchulainn is half human and half god, right? In the same way that Hercules is, or in the same way that, you know, people like Achilles were. And also Cuchulainn's father is a person called Lugh. So L-U-G-H, and it's where we get the name for County Louth from. So in Irish, that county, it happens to be the smallest county in the country. It's called County Louth. And it's also where you get the name of the city Lyon in France. So that comes from the same Celtic deity, Lugh. The month of August in Ireland as well is known as Lunasa. So it's the month of Lugh. So anyway, that was Cuchulainn's father. And I'm not sure if he played hurling as well, but if he did, I bet he was pretty good. So going back right to the end of, or towards the end of the 19th century, in Ireland, British sports were becoming increasingly popular, especially after the codification of these sports. Now, what I mean by codification is that the rule books for association football, for rugby union, for cricket. The rules were being written down at this time, and the rules were being figured out, and these sports were being formalized and they were being professionalized. So a sport like cricket, right, it's still played in Ireland to a certain extent. There's a cricket club in Cork, for example, down in the Mardyke. But in the 19th century, it used to be played very, very widely. One of the reasons being that, you know, because it had been codified and there was a rule book and there was a standard size cricket pitch, and everybody kind of had rules that they agreed upon, it meant that you could have competitions, you could play against different teams from all over the country. It was just more professionalized and more competitive. So Irish sports such as hurling and Gaelic football were being played as well in the 19th century, but they were only being played at a local level between local parishes, and the sports themselves, they'd yet to be codified. So there were different versions of the rules for hurling and for Gaelic football, depending on what part of the country you played in. Now, when Irish immigrants went to the United States, they brought, you know, Gaelic football with them, and that kind of turned into what is now known as American football. When Irish migrants took the sport of Gaelic football to Australia, it became what is now the modern sport of, you know, Aussie rules football, right? They're both more like rugby than they're like football. But in Gaelic football, you know, you can use your hands as well. So it's the same in American football and in Australian rules football. I think American football is kind of a combination of rugby and Gaelic football. You know, so it's a combination of different things, whereas Australian rules football is very, very similar to Gaelic football. So sometimes Ireland play against Australia in what is called mixed rules or international rules football. So it's a mixture between Australian football and Gaelic football. But both of those, Gaelic football and Australian football, come from the same source. So they were taken to Australia by Irish immigrants before the rules had been formalized, before the sport had been codified. Okay, so this meant, you know, that a lot of people in Ireland started playing, you know, the foreign sports, if you like rugby and association football. So association football is like soccer, right? So soccer and cricket, they started playing those sports because, you know, there was a much higher level of athleticism, competition, and professionalism in these sports. So the Irish sports themselves were in danger, you know, of dying out. So the Gaelic Athletic Association was established at this time on the 1st of November in 1884 in a place called Hayes Hotel in the town of Thurles in Tipperary. So it was set up to promote and encourage more people to play the native sports of Gaelic football and hurling. So their first sort of task was to codify these sports, you know, to create rule books for them that everybody all around the country agreed upon, to formalize, for example, things like the ground or the pitch that you play on, you know, what size the goalposts or what distance the goalposts should be from one another, the size of the stadium, you know, all of these things were formalized by the Gaelic Athletic Association, or the GAA. And, you know, they did all this to make it more professional. Also, they encouraged people to establish clubs. So clubs were established in parishes all around the country around this time as well, in the 1880s. And slowly but surely, these sports started to take over and started to become more popular than the foreign sports, the colonial sports, if you like, of cricket and rugby. But some of the urban areas, such as Cork and Limerick, they continued to play rugby to a high standard. And also the urban areas continued to play, you know, association football or soccer. But these games stopped being played out in rural Ireland. So, you know, people started playing the Gaelic sports more and more. So these are two of the people that were behind the GAA when it started out. So you have, first of all, Micheál Ciasóg, or Michael Cusack is his name in English, and then Murish O'Dine. Michael Cusack was the first ever secretary, and O'Dine was made the president of the Gaelic Athletic Association. So we're going to look a little bit at Michael Cusack's history. Right, this is on a website called Ask About Ireland, which is a great little website for finding out about Irish history and culture, but with English that's not too difficult. So it's kind of aimed at older primary school children, you know, about 11 or 12 years of age. So anyway, let me tell you about Michael Cusack. So Michael Cusack was born, you can see the house that he was born in here, in North Clare, in the parish of Carron, in 1847. And he grew up on the eastern edge of the Burren. So the Burren is a really kind of rocky limestone dominated area in Clare. And he grew up in this small cottage that you can see with his parents, his four brothers and sisters, or four brothers and one sister. His first language, and the language of most people who were living in Clare at that time in the 1840s, was Irish. So it is said that he didn't speak any English until he was 11 years old, but he quickly learned English. This was a time in the second half of the 19th century where the number of people speaking English as their primary language started to really increase and become, you know, for the first time in the history of Ireland, the majority of people spoke English in their daily lives. So he didn't speak English anyway with Michael Cusack until he was 11 years old. So you can see still in his childhood up until about the 1870s or 80s, County Clare was almost exclusively Irish speaking. But anyway, he quickly learned English and he remained bilingual for the rest of his life. So he did well in school and he went on to train as a teacher. So the primary school system, or the National School Act, had come into force in 1839, I believe, in Ireland. And it meant that there was kind of free education available to children between the ages of 4 and 15. So these are the schools that are still known as the national schools around the country. And these were the first schools that were set up that were free of charge. In fact, this school system, this free of charge school system that was set up in Ireland, was the first one of its kind in the world. First kind of modern school system. And it was an amazing thing for people like Michael Cusack, because when he was born, he was able to get a good quality education for free until he was 15. And then after that, he was able to move on because his parents, you know, they weren't very wealthy, but they had enough money to send them off to train as a teacher. Also having schools allowed people, you know, people with an education to stay in Ireland, and it meant that there was a job available for them. And, you know, it meant that a lot of people as well were able to get out of poverty. So he continued playing sports and was especially good at the shot put. So shot put is when you hold a kind of big kind of iron ball and then you have to throw it. It's still played in the Olympics. So that's the game that he was best at. He began to become more and more involved in journalism and politics, and he had less time as a result for his teaching career. So the GAA. So Cusack, here you can see a picture of him, a photograph of him from towards the end of his life. So Cusack did not approve of how sports were controlled at the time. Firstly, those in charge of organized sports did not approve of games being played on a Sunday. So those in charge of organized sports, you can read there the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church, especially in Ireland, were against having sports on a Sunday. And this was a shame because most people in Ireland who were working class or who worked in farms, the ordinary people, the vast majority of the country at the time, they worked 6 days a week. You know, Saturday was a working day as well. It's only in the late second half of the 20th century that Saturday became a day off. So they were only free on Sunday. So it was the only day the only day that they could be played. So it meant that organized games were quite elitist because, you know, excluded people who worked on manual jobs like laborers. For manual comes from the Latin manus, for hands. So if you've got a manual job, then it's a job where you use your hands, a physical job. So like laborers, mechanics, and small farmers. So Cusack was also concerned that the traditional Irish games of hurling and Gaelic football were falling into decline. So Cusack started the Gaelic Athletic Association, or the GAA as it's better known, in 1884. The first meeting of the organization, as I mentioned, took place in Thurles in 1884. And the aims of this new organization were to foster and promote these Irish games and to stop them going into decline. Okay, so there was a movement at the same time to kind of stop the decline of the Irish language. And this was part of that movement, part of that kind of widespread Celtic revival. So 4 games were named on the original GAA charter. So we know about hurling and Gaelic football. There's another sport called handball, where it's basically like squash, but with your hand. So you hit the ball against the wall. It can only bounce once, but with your hand instead of like with a little racket. Or paddle, maybe. It's probably more similar to that. And then rounders is a game that is the same as baseball. So it's basically when Irish immigrants took the game of rounders to the United States, it turned into the game of baseball, right? So baseball has origins in the Irish game of rounders. The rules are almost exactly the same for baseball. So Cusack, his legacy can be seen in every village and town around Ireland. So there are over 1,600 GAA clubs in Ireland. There are lots of other GAA clubs, I think 600 GAA clubs outside of Ireland. In the UK, USA, Australia, Canada especially, but also in places like Argentina and like France as well, Spain, there are GAA clubs there. So the GAA pitch in Ennis, so Ennis is the biggest town in County Clare. It's named Cusack Park in his memory. And his childhood home has been preserved and is now a museum, and it's open to the public. Okay, so that's Micheál Ciasóg, or Michael Cusack. Okay, I think my slideshow has stopped there for a second, so I'm going to have to share it once again. Okay, so as I was saying, GAA clubs were set up all around the country, and they all proved to be very popular, especially, as I mentioned, in rural areas. So this is a team that you can see in the photograph from County Waterford. You can see that the picture was taken in 1915. Now, notice the way, you know, like this guy, he has his name written on the hurley, and the shape of the sticks, they're much more similar to hockey sticks, modern hockey sticks. or they're even more similar to ice hockey sticks, you know. So you can see when this game was taken out to places like Canada, that people started playing it, you know, in the winter when lakes would freeze over. So, you know, it sort of brought about that sport in Canada, for example. So anyway, competitions were organized and played on Sundays, right? They eventually got, there was a bishop called Bishop Croke. So he was the first bishop to sort of put his support behind Gaelic games being played on Sundays. And then now, ever since, Sunday has been, you know, the kind of the main day when the games of hurling and football are played. Okay, so guys, I just want you to look at the differences, right, in the uniform, right, that they were wearing at the time. You can see, look, that this guy here has suspenders to hold up his socks, okay, and he also has, you know, kind of big boots, big leather boots, right, and people often would wear kind of the same type of clothing that they would wear, you know, in normal life when they were playing these sports. But gradually, you know, as the 19th century turned into the 20th century, they started wearing special outfits that denoted their team. You can see that this team here has the shamrock as a crest, and they're called Shamrock Hurling Club in County Waterford. So you see, you know, the difference between the modern hurley. The boss of the hurley is much wider. Also, the hurler wears a helmet with a face shield. And hurlers also use gum shields like boxers use, because if you get a slitter into the mouth, I've felt it a couple of times. It really hurts. It can break your teeth as well. My father, unfortunately, he got a wallop of a hurley into the teeth when he was playing a match one time, and he unfortunately lost all his front teeth when he was 17. So it can be quite dangerous. But anyway, now it's regulation. Everybody has to wear one of these helmets with the face shield. So you don't have a choice about that. So anyway, Limerick won the first All-Ireland Football Championship in 1888. So that was, you know, like the GAA was started in 1884. So within 4 years, they had an All-Ireland Football Championship between each of the counties. So all 32 of the counties, remember, Ireland hasn't been partitioned at this stage. So all 32 counties competed in these competitions, or they were eligible to compete in this competition. Tipperary won the first All-Ireland Hurling Championship. So here's a picture of the club team, Arravale Rovers. They're from Tiberdoran, which is Tipperary. And they won the first All-Ireland Club Championship in Croke Park. So you can see Croke Park, or Park and Croke, was named after that bishop who was one of the early supporters of the GAA and allowed games to be played on Sundays. So in 1896, the GAA, they purchased sports grounds, the Jones Sports Grounds in Dublin, and they renamed it Croke Memorial Park after the Bishop Croke. And Croke Park, I'm going to explain a little bit about it a little bit later, but Croke Park is the third biggest stadium in terms of capacity in Europe, and it's in the top 10 in terms of capacity in the world. So I think the largest in terms of capacity in Europe is El Camp Nou in Barcelona, just down the road from Ida's place in Girona. And then you have, I think the other a very large stadium might be El Bernabeu in Madrid. And then you have Croke Park. So the capacity of Croke Park is 86,500. And that's all seating. So anyway, looking at the women's version of the sport. So the women's version of hurling is called camogie. And the first ever All-Ireland Camogie Championship took place in 1904. And Dublin won the final against Galway. Okay, so you can see here a photograph of an early camogie team from Waterford. And looking at the clothes that they were wearing, you know, this is kind of the outfit or the uniform that they were wearing for their hurling team, which was, I think, probably maybe the uniform that they would wear in school for sports in general. They look like sailors there, I think, as well. And you can see that the hairstyles and the hurleys as well are quite different. Again, they look more like ice hockey sticks than modern hurleys, which are much wider. Okay, and looking at the modern dress, so you can see that, you know, camogie players, they have to wear regulation helmets and face guards as well. The hurley is similar to in the men's sport, and you know, they wear shorter skirts. And they wear, you know, kind of similar, I suppose, outfits to soccer players or to hurling players. So they were wearing, they used to wear longer skirts before, you know, partly this is because, you know, it was seen as inappropriate or immoral to be wearing short skirts back in the beginning of the 20th century. There was also a rule that players were forbidden to hide the ball in their skirts. So they couldn't hide the slitter in their skirts. They weren't allowed to do that. Right, so anyway, the GAA in 1913, they purchased Jones Memorial Park in Dublin, and they renamed it Croke Memorial Park. So I was talking about that earlier. Here's a picture of Thomas Croke himself, right? So I said that he was a Catholic bishop and that he was the one who, you know, first sort of tried to convince the other members of the church, who were very powerful at the time over Irish public opinion. He convinced them, you know, that it's okay to play games on a Sunday. So here's a picture of Croke Park today. As I said, you know, over 85,000 capacity, 86,500. It's a beautiful stadium. So what sport is being played, guys, in the picture here?
Hurling.
No, it's not. It's not hurling. They're using their hand.
They put the money, the coins.
No. It's the sport of handball. So they're using their hands. So it's kind of like outdoor squash or paddle. But you play it. You don't play it with a racket. You play it with just the hand. Okay. So that's the way that it's done. So anyway, that's the sport that's been played. So I'll give you a look at handball to kind of see what it's like. So this is going to take us to, actually, maybe I can just send you guys the link because it wouldn't allow me to take you there. So I'll just send you the link on Zoom, and I'll just give you a moment to take a look at that. So I'll just put it into the chat there. Okay, so have a look in the chat, and we'll just take a minute just to have a look at the sport. Okay, so guys, the Handball Association anyway was started in 1924. So we're going to move on now to one of the most famous things that happened in the GAA, that happened in their history. Before we do this though, does anybody recognize that man in the photograph just there that I'm showing you?
Rob, what's some question?
Yeah.
What's the question? Can you repeat, please?
Yeah, so I'm just saying, who is the man in the picture there that I've got on my screen?
Some coach or president?
It's more like the second one.
Prime Minister?
Not exactly. No, he's Michael Collins.
Oh.
Michael Collins was our, revolutionary leader.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, so he was from West Cork, from Clonakilty. You can go down and see the house that he... Oh, right, yeah. So you can go down and see the house that he grew up on. Anyway, so Michael Collins, right, this is a picture of him throwing in the ball for the game between Dublin and Kilkenny on the 11th of September 1921. Now, probably the most famous thing that happened, right, and this is connected with Michael Collins, right, is Bloody Sunday. Now, Bloody Sunday happened on the 21st of November 1920. So that was actually the centenary of it, the 100-year anniversary. The centenary of Bloody Sunday was last Saturday. And basically what happened was there was a match that was going on that day between Tipperary and Dublin, Gaelic football. So it was happening in Croke Park, and there was loads and loads of people going to see the match. Now, Ireland and Britain were in the middle of a war at that time. It's known in Irish history as the War of Independence. And that morning, Michael Collins, he had sent a group of assassins to go around and to kill the British intelligence agents, nearly all of the British intelligence agents who were living in Dublin at that time. They were known as the Cairo Gang. So he sent his squad, they were called the 12 Apostles, to go around and kill them. So that really, it was a lethal blow to British power in Ireland to completely knock out their intelligence services in Dublin. But it also made, the British very angry. So they were looking for revenge. So this is what happened later in the day. So that happened in the morning, right, where there were, I think, 12 British agents that were killed by the Irish forces under Michael Collins. But then the British came to the match between Tipperary and Dublin, and they thought that some of the people who had been doing the shooting of their intelligence agents in Dublin had come up from Tipperary for the match. So this is how the events that followed during that match was depicted in the film Michael Collins. So this is going to take you to YouTube. Okay, so you can see the game kind of going on there between Tipperary and Dublin. The game had only just started, and then the British forces, the British auxiliary forces, known as the Black and Tan, and then members of the RIC, the Royal Irish Constabulary. They enter the stadium. Now, in the film, it's depicted as an armoured car entering the stadium. They didn't enter an armoured car. The armoured car stayed outside. But what you will see otherwise is what happened on the day. So they basically opened fire on both the players and on the supporters watching the match. Okay, so one of the players was murdered. His name was Michael Hogan. Another player was injured, and then there were 12 people, including 4 children, that were murdered in the crowd. And then 60 people were seriously injured, or they received bullets. Okay, you can imagine like how much panic like that it caused in the crowd. And yeah, so that happened on the 21st of November. It was obviously, you know, a very kind of event. And, you know, Irish people kind of have never forgotten about that event. It made the news all around the world. You can see that this paper is from Canada, this newspaper. So you can see like that, you know, it shocked people. It also damaged the reputation of the British around the world, particularly in the United States. It was seen that, you know, British forces were out of control, and, you know, it seemed shocking that they were willing to, you know, murder civilians watching a match in cold blood. But anyway, the anniversary of Bloody Sunday took place, as I said, last Saturday on the 21st of November. And there's a documentary on the RTE player at the moment. There's also a series of podcasts produced by RTE, all about Bloody Sunday and about the events that happened. You know, like it was a war. There was a war going on between the British and the Irish at the time. So like terrible things, terrible atrocities were committed on both sides. But this particular one kind of stands out for people as being particularly cruel. And it was one that I think a lot of people in Ireland found it very, very difficult to forgive the British after Bloody Sunday. Now, thankfully, though, relations are beginning to be normalized between Britain and Ireland. For example, Queen Elizabeth II made a state visit in 2011, and during her state visit, she made a speech in Croke Park at the site of Bloody Sunday. And she used some words of Irish as well at the beginning of her speech, which people really appreciated. So, so relations are improving, certainly, and you have the Good Friday Agreement as well, protecting the peace in Northern Ireland. So things are better, but people are, of course, worried about, you know, Brexit and what that will do to the border in Northern Ireland. So there's a lot of kind of uncertainty about the future, but hopefully the peace that was established by the Good Friday Agreement will be respected by the British, even if they leave Brexit without an agreement, or leave the European Union without an agreement. Maria Teresa, you're with us. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. I am here. Yes. Hello.
Great. Good to have you. I'm recording the session, so you know you don't have to worry. I will. You can get the part that you missed after the class. Also for Amy and for Angela, you can, you know, if you ever miss any part of it, I record these sessions. So I'll put it up on YouTube, and then I'll send you the link as well to your email address, so you'll be able to keep in touch. Anyway, so this is something that happened right a long time ago in 1920, but it still has an effect on us. And sports that we consider to be English sports, like association football, like rugby, they were not allowed to be played on GAA grounds. That rule, which is known as Rule 42, it was only turned over in 2004. And the reason that it was turned over and that it was repealed was that the Irish rugby team and soccer team, they play in a place called the Aviva Stadium in South Dublin. So in the 2000s, this stadium was being redeveloped and rebuilt. So nobody could play, they couldn't hold matches at that stadium for about 5 years or so. So they needed somewhere else to be able to play. And Croke Park is the only other stadium in Dublin that's kind of big enough to accommodate them. So they changed the rules specifically for that. Now, the first ever non-Irish sport, non-Gaelic sport that was played in Croke Park was a rugby match between Ireland and England, and it took place in 2007, I think, right? 2007. So that was a very, very emotional match, and particularly, you know, people were nervous when, you know, because it was an international match, the national anthems of both England and Ireland were going to be played. So Áureann na Bhíodhán for the Irish, and then God Save the Queen for the English team. And, you know, also Ireland plays rugby as an island, not as two separate nations. So, you know, that kind of adds a little bit of extra controversy in there too. It was one of my proudest moments when I saw that, when they sang God Save the Queen in Croke Park, that the Irish crowd, the Irish supporters, who were, of course, the vast majority of people at the stadium on the day, that they didn't say anything, they didn't boo during the rendition of God Save the Queen. They stayed respectfully quiet, and people were very nervous about that, about whether, you know, like the English team would be booed because of the history with Bloody Sunday and all of that. But, you know, that was one of the things I think that helped to normalize relations, let's say, between Britain and Ireland, in spite of this war that was fought for so long. So that's Bloody Sunday. So go ahead and, you know, watch that documentary, which is going on, which you can find on the RTE player at the moment. So the Ladies Gaelic Football Association was established in Thurles in Tipperary. This was the 90th anniversary of the founding of the GAA. So Gaelic football, because it's more of a contact sport, it was seen as not suitable for women. But anyway, it's now, you know, extremely competitive, and you get a lot of people going to the ladies' finals as well, or All Ireland finals. I think the attendance was something like 65,000 at the football final in 2019, the ladies' Gaelic football final, which Cork played in against Dublin. So here's a photograph of the first ever team to win the Ladies Gaelic Football Championship in 1974. You can go on here, and just this is into RTE archives, and it's about an exhibition about, you know, football for women in the 1980s. So let's just take a quick look at it.
Is there a difference between the men's
See if you can
and women's football,
hear
say,
the sound.
in terms of finances? There's a big difference. Yeah.
I'll actually, guys, just send you the link. That will be easier, and you can have a look at it yourself. It's only a couple of minutes, so I'll just send you the link there on the chat on Zoom. All right, so I'll just give you a minute there to take a look at that.
It's Black Friday week at independent.ie, and that means a year's premium digital subscription for $69.99. Save.
Yeah, so just after the First World War, the All Ireland was played over there. You can just click on the link when I give you the presentation later, and then it will take you directly, to the video. So here's some pictures of that final taking place in Yankee Stadium in New York. And there were a lot of people at it as well, and it was Cavan against Kerry. You can see that there are many supporters there. So anyway, that was a really kind of big occasion to have that kind of thing going on. So anyway, and it was filmed as well, so it's great that we have a record of it. Okay, so the foreign sports ban, so this is Rule 42, that should say RULE, Rule 42. So these are two separate things. So Rule 42, RULE, was changed in 2004 that we were talking about earlier, there was another ban, and it was a ban on members of the GAA to play other sports. Now that ban was stopped in 1971, but when I was young, right, so I was I was playing GAA in the 1990s and the early 2000s, and even then it was still kind of frowned upon if you played hurling and you also played soccer as well, or rugby as well, particularly by the older people in the GAA. So my local club, Erin's Own, you know, if they had known that I was playing for the local soccer club, Leaside, as well, you know, they wouldn't have given me a game. They wouldn't have allowed me to play. So it was pretty severe in terms of, you know, like people sticking just to the Irish sports. What's your opinion about this rule? Maybe you can think about that and perhaps we can discuss it afterwards. So I mentioned the plan to revamp Croke Park. So that happened, it was announced at least in 1993. And in 2002, the development of Croke Park was finished ahead of time. So it's now the third largest stadium in Europe with a capacity of, 82,300. So it's a beautiful stadium, as you can see here in the pictures. And the stand on the opposite side, right, it's called Hill 16. So the one that doesn't, like the small stand. The reason that they didn't develop that one, right, is that it's called Hill 16 because the rubble that was caused from the buildings that were blown up by the British during 1916 in the battle that happened in Dublin city centre. So the rubble, the bricks and the stones and stuff from damaged buildings, they were used to build this stand. So it's kind of like, it's holy ground almost. So yeah, that's Hill 16. And then you have another stand, and the name of that stand is the Hogan stand. And Michael Hogan is the player that you saw shot by the British on Bloody Sunday. So anyway, that's the stadium there. So I mentioned, right, in 2005, the GAA, I said 2004, but anyway, it was 2005 that they got rid of Rule 42, that the GAA allowed soccer and rugby matches to take place in Croke Park for the first time. It was only on a temporary basis while the Aviva Stadium was being built. So here's a painting, right, of the match on the day between Ireland and England. And it was a massive deal, big deal as well for people when this was going on in the country. You know, like it wasn't just a sporting event. It was a historical event, you know, that Ireland should play England, you know, whose forces came in and shot innocent civilians in the same ground in 1920. So during the playing of the national anthem, you know, it was a very emotional period. And as I said earlier, I felt very proud, you know, that Irish people in the stadium, you know, there's 83,000 people in the stadium, was full to capacity, that nobody booed, nobody sort of said anything. But I'm going to show you, or at least I'm going to copy this link. Actually, this will take you to this link here, and I'll send that to you then. So it's a video from that day where, you know, they show the anthems being for the players. You know, it's a really big deal that they were playing England. And, you know, the historical significance of the event is very powerful. You can see that on the players' faces. So I'll just send that link there to you because I think you need to hear the commentary too.
North Dublin. Please
So the British anthem is being sung, and you can hear the players singing because the crowd is quiet. And now when you see the Irish anthem being played, the emotion on the Irish rugby players' faces is
giving a pretty
incredible.
lusty rendition of the English anthem. But I think Ireland may just have the edge on them when it comes to the home anthem.
Look at that for emotion. Incredible emotion. So quite a few players crying and, you know, getting very emotional for it. So you can see what an important historical event, and everybody, you know, was, it was really a proud moment that it went well and that there weren't any people trying to destroy the atmosphere, and, you know. So anyway, today there are 2,200 Gaelic Games clubs around the country and 400 abroad. There are 500 camogie clubs and there are 1,000 women's Gaelic football clubs. And there should be Croke, C-R-O-K-E, is one of the biggest stadiums in the world. So the same cannot be said for all of the GAA sports. So some of the sports like Gaelic football and hurling became very popular. Rounders and handball did not achieve the same kind of level of popularity in Irish society. So guys, right, true or false, I might leave this until the end because I want to move on to something else now. I did have a few questions for you, but Erisher, I'll give them to you now. Just bear with me now for just 1 second. I'll open the questions. So these questions are in Irish, so I can have them on the screen at the same time. You won't be able to understand them. I think hopefully it'll open up anyway without any problem. Actually, it's not there. I thought it was there. Sorry about this. Actually, I'm not sure. Sorry, I can't kind of quite place them now. So anyway, look, we'll continue on. We can come back to them in a minute. So yeah, let me just go on to the next one. So I want to talk about the Gaelic revival more widely now. Thanks for that link there, Maria Teresa. So yeah, Argentina was a champion in 2015. The championship took place in Abu Dhabi. Wow. Okay. Amazing. Thanks for that. So anyway, as you can see on the screen there, right, I'm going to be talking more generally about the Irish cultural revival of the 19th century. So look, one thing that was happening along with you know, the revival of the Gaelic sports was the revival of the Irish language. So a renewed interest started in the Irish language in the 1880s and particularly the 1890s. In 1892, Douglas Hyde, who became the first president of the Republic of Ireland, he gave a lecture called The Necessity of De-Anglicizing the Irish People. So by de-Anglicizing, we mean, you know, like turning them away from being English or British to being Irish again. He said that if Irish disappeared, now by Irish he means the Irish language, the Irish people would not be entitled to claim to be a nation. So there was a real connection between, you know, language and nationhood in Europe in the later half of the 19th century. You know, like if we think of, you know, Denmark, in Denmark, you know, they speak Danish. In Norway, they speak Norwegian. In Sweden, they speak Swedish. In Austria, right, they speak German, but in Germany, they speak German. In the Czech Republic, they speak Czech. In Poland, they speak Polish. So, you know, like lots of nation states, let's say in Europe, you know, they have a tradition of being based around the language identity, right? So the nation and the language identity, you know, they're interwoven. They're very close together. And so that feeling was there in Ireland as well. And that's why Douglas Hyde pointed out that, you know, it was very important to maintain the Irish language. So to this end, in 1893, he and Eoin MacNeill set up the Gaelic League. Its aims were, first of all, to preserve and revive Irish as a spoken language. Also to encourage and publish literature in modern Irish. By the way, this is the Irish word for Ireland. So this says Éire, and this says Seachtain na Gaeilge, or Irish Language Week. So it's sort of saying, you know, which side are you on? Do you want to be like living in West Britain, you know, a poor sort of person looking for handouts from the British government, or do you want to be Irish? So which side of the language debate are you on? At least that was the debate that they were trying to make there. So anyway, the decline of the Irish language. So the Irish language was the most obvious difference between Irish and English, but it had been declining since the 18th century. Now, in 1851, 23% of the population spoke Irish as a native language. That's in the whole country. And this had fallen to 14% by 1891. So, you know, it was dying out at a rapid speed. The decline was due to, first of all, the low status of Irish. Irish people who spoke it were poor and they were uneducated. Also, powerful figures such as landlords, judges, and politicians spoke English. English was much more useful for immigration, you know, particularly for going to Canada, Australia, and the United States. So parents, you know, wanted the schools to teach it to their children, and they didn't want them to teach this. They didn't want the schools to teach their children Irish, because Irish was seen as, you know, the language of poverty and the language of the past, and, you know, that English was the language of the town, the urban areas in the country, and of, you know, the British Empire, and it was the commercial language. So there was massive pressure, massive desire on the behalf of Irish parents, you know, to get their children to learn to speak English in the schools. And few Irish speakers could read and write Irish. So remember, right, when the national school system was set up, they were forbidden to teach Irish as a subject, or even to teach subjects in Irish. Now, when the national school system was set up, first of all, in the late 1930s, you know, like this is before the famine. So about maybe 60% of the country was Irish speaking then, 64%. So at the start of the 19th century, the percentage was about 90% of the country speaking Irish. I'm just going to show you a video, right, very quickly about how the Irish language declined over the 19th century. So let's take a look at this now. That's me preparing for a future lecture. Right, so you see, you know, how quickly English spreads. Irish is in red there. So in 1740, you know, it's spoken almost by everybody, except in, you know, Dublin and the eastern half of the country and places like Belfast. You know, in the rest of the country, it's almost exclusively Irish. Okay, and then as the 19th century goes on, well, if I just go back to the start of that video again, this is funny. Right, you see how, just like if you're looking at the date, particularly the Great Famine, you know, the Great Famine suddenly like kills it off, because 1 million people died in Ireland during those years from 1845 to 1852. And about 99% of those 1 million people who died during that time. So like, just look at that now, right, in on the eve of the Great Famine, right? Look at that. You know, a great majority of the people of the country speak Irish, right? Outside of the province of Leinster and then West Ulster, like in Munster, for example, or in Cork, everybody speaks Irish. So, you know, that's the only language that you hear. And then when the famine is over, right, when we go on to like 1855, you can see that those 1 million people that died, you know, a lot of those were Irish speakers. So that really laid a blow to it. Now, another million emigrated between that time. So that's 2 million people. And again, the people who emigrated were almost exclusively Irish speakers as well. That's why there's such a great influence on American, as in US slang, US urban slang in English. But there was a lot of influence on US urban slang from the Irish language. Did the Scots experience the same situation? I mean, the prohibition to speak their language. They did. And the decline it happened slightly later, but it was a parallel decline. And, you know, also the decline in Wales. You know, the English were particularly against the Welsh language, even more so than the Irish language. But then you see, right, so 1 million people emigrated, and then millions of others emigrated throughout the rest of the 19th century. So you see here 1879, it says on Garta Biog, which is the small famine or the third famine, that really devastated even further and spurred another massive wave of emigration. And when you come to the dawning of the 20th century, you know, it's basically this is where the language is kind of today. These are kind of the areas where it's still spoken as a native language today. No, it's not all negative, because the Irish language is being widely spoken for the first time in a very long time in the cities. The Gaelic or Irish medium schools are becoming more and more popular. Like in Cork City, for example, 25% of primary school children and secondary school children go and they have all of their education through the medium of Irish, except for English. So they do all the other subjects, everything is through Irish. And you know, they also go to kindergarten through the medium of Irish as well. So you can see how widely it's spoken in West Cork. And how many people are fluent in Irish now? I'd say somewhere between 10 and 15% have full fluency. The number of native speakers is about 2%. It depends who you ask, but it's approximately 2%. But the positive thing, right, is that 5% of children between 3 and 4 years of age speak Irish, and that's the highest that it's been in a long time. So even though it's still, you know, very much a minority language in Ireland, it's on the rise. So like, obviously it's still minimal in comparison to English. English is the lingua franca of the country, but you know, Irish looks like it's going to experience some sort of a mini revival, you know, and one that's definitely been happening. Sometimes it's the hidden language, because, you know, like, people might imagine in Cork City but that nobody speaks the language, but, you know, I know myself that like, I know lots of people, and, you know, on my day-to-day basis, you know, I would speak Irish to people that I know, to friends. Around UCC, there's a lot of Irish being spoken. A lot of my colleagues I would speak to in Irish exclusively. So it is there, and it is kind of hidden sometimes, especially for, yeah, well, in Dublin, Dublin, ironically, is where over half of the native speakers of Irish live. So again, it's a hidden thing. But there's about 100,000 people in Dublin who speak Irish. And that's where all the jobs are. That's where the majority of the jobs, you know, in state agencies, you know, where you need the language. So it is, you know, it's on the rise in urban areas, but still it's very much threatened in the rural areas. And even in the places like West Cork and Kerry and Galway, Donegal, Mayo, where it's still, Waterford, where it's still spoken as a native language today, it's still, you know, a minority language in those areas, because, you know, English is all powerful. And it's very hard to get away from that. Like, if you go to buy a newspaper in a shop in the middle of the Galway Gaeltacht, like in Connemara, you know, all of the newspapers in the shop, almost 95% of them, they're going to be in English, you know. So even native speakers, you know, they really have to make an effort to maintain their literacy in the language. Anyway, so that's just a brief insight into Irish. We're going to go back now to see how we got to the situation, how we stopped the decline, because, you know, I think as modest as the number of people is that speak Irish today, had it not been for the revival, the language would have disappeared. There's no doubt about it. So the decline was due to, first of all, the low status of the language, as I was saying earlier, and the fact that, you know, the powerful people, schools and universities and politicians, they all spoke it. So anyway, this new interest starts, right? Started by people like Douglas Hyde, or Douglas the Hida, as is known in Irish. So he actually was a Church of Ireland minister, so a Protestant minister, okay, living in County Roscommon. So coming from, you know, a kind of a unionist background, a background that would have been, you know, seen itself as culturally British. But he grew up with a love of the county of Roscommon, of the local people. And as a young man, he went around and he showed a great interest in their stories. And of course, in Roscommon at this time, Irish was the native language. So he started getting interested in it, like a lot of people of his generation. And he started translating some of the love songs that the peasants would sing in Connacht into English so that people in Dublin and in the cities could read it. And also he started collecting folklore, and he started this organization that we're going to talk about a little bit more, the Gaelic League. So this new interest in Irish appeared in the 1880s, 1890s. It kind of started as well with linguistic scholars, particularly from Germany. You know, like there was the Grimm brothers, for example. You know, we know them from collecting fairy tales, but they primarily were linguists, and they were very interested in Gaelic and Celtic folklore. Because as well, Irish monks during the Middle Ages, you know, they had opened up monasteries all over Europe and set up schools there. So there was a lot of old Irish that survived in, for example, German and Austrian monasteries. In fact, almost all of the examples that are extant of old Irish, the Irish that was spoken, let's say from 400 AD to 1000 AD, those samples, probably 85% of them, of the samples of Old Irish that are extant, that are still in existence, were found on the European continent. So linguists were coming over from places like German universities, Austrian universities especially, coming over from Sweden, and they were, you know, interested to find out about the language and see how, you know, how well it was spoken. Also, they wanted to compare some of the German folklore, you know, with the Celtic folklore to see, you know, if, oh, maybe they have some kind of connections, you know, that we can make. And basically people were trying to kind of discover where they had come from. So that's how that interest started. And then a lot of this Irish poetry and folk tales, they started to get translated into English. Then you also had at the same time the Anglo-Irish literary revival. So this was spurred on by the interest in Gaelic literature. So that encouraged some people to develop distinctively Irish literature in English. One of these, the poet W.B. Yeats. So he didn't manage to speak Irish, to learn how to speak Irish very well, although he did join the Gaelic League. But he was influenced by translations of you know, people like Douglas Hyde and others who translated Irish works and Irish folklore and stories and songs into English. So he was inspired by this Irish mythology now that was accessible to him. And, you know, it meant that, you know, his works and his writing style was influenced by the Celtic past. So after studying art, right, his brother became an artist, but Yeats himself didn't really pursue his career as a painter, but he began writing poetry instead and using stories and images from Gaelic myth that he had been reading about and that was popular in Ireland due to the Celtic revival. So he published The Wanderings of Oisin, a long poem based on Irish mythology. Oisin was the son of another hero, not Cuchulainn, but another hero by the name of Fionn McCool, who was the leader of the Fianna, who were an elite military group. And anyway, this is a long poem based on this mythology, but based on Fionn McCool and his son Oisin. And that was published in 1882. And his first poetic play, The Countess Kathleen, that was based on Irish mythology as well, an Irish mythological story, that was published in 1892. In 1891, Douglas Hyde and others set up the National Literary Society to encourage interest in Irish mythology. And he also joined the Gaelic League, so that group, Conradh na Gaeilge, as it's called in Irish, set up by Douglas the Hyde. But he did not succeed in learning Irish, unfortunately. Now, Yeats was in love with this lady called Maud Gonne, who was an out-and-out hardcore Republican, Irish Republican. So he became involved in extreme nationalism through her, and he briefly belonged to the Irish Republican Brotherhood, or the IRB. So you can see there's this connection between nationalism and the armed struggle, which you're going to see coming more to the fore, later in the early 20th century. So Gunn rejected him, and she married John MacBride. Okay, in 1896 he met Lady Gregory. She was a widow of a Galway landlord, and she'd been collecting folk tales locally and writing plays. So at her home in Galway, at her home in Galway, she, sorry there guys, I was just getting a phone call. So at her home in Galway, they set up the Irish Literary Theatre that I was talking about, and that's where his play was staged, The Countess Kathleen, in 1899. In 1902, Maud Gonne, so this is the woman that Yeats was in love with, she played the title role in Kathleen Ní Chúiltheáin, which had a powerful influence on nationalists. Kathleen Ní Chúiltheáin she's a sort of a metaphor for Ireland. Then in 1904, Yeats and Gregory formed the Irish National Theatre in collaboration with a group of actors led by Frank and William Fay. And then a wealthy English woman, Annie Horniman, bought a hall in Abbey Street and fitted it out as a theatre. So that became the Abbey Theatre from 1904. And that became the main kind of stage for Irish literary performance from the early 19th century on. So around 1910, the Irish literary revival ran out of steam, and the people who led it began to get more interested in politics. So in 1913, Yeats wrote a poem called 1913, that's the name of the poem, and in it he wrote that romantic Ireland's dead and gone. But how wrong he was, because it was only going to be 3 years later that he would write a poem called 1916, which celebrated the Easter Rising. So two personalities that I was speaking about, you can read about these two in your own time. I'll give you a brief overview. So Douglas the Hyde, who became our first president of Ireland, Uachtarán na hÉireann, right? That's how you say the president of Ireland. So he was the one who started Conradh na Gaeilge, or the Irish League. He was a great ambassador for the language. He was also a great ambassador for the country because, like Ireland was, overwhelmingly Catholic. The new state was overwhelmingly Catholic. About 90% of people almost were Catholic. So it was poetic justice in a way that we chose a Protestant, but who was also a proud Irishman, to represent us as our first ever president. So you can read some other details about him, and he's a prolific writer. He published a lot of poetry and stories for children in Irish that are still read in schools today. He also managed to convince the education system in Ireland, the Commission on the Intermediate examination, to include Irish in the secondary school curriculum. He also encouraged the education system to teach Irish in the primary schools and then the secondary schools when they were opened. So he really pushed the language. He was a great hero for the language. And then you can read a little bit about William Butler Yeats. These are taken from a book called, for the junior cert, called EDCO Revised Wise. So if you want to see where the original source was. So guys, that's nearly the end of the presentation. You can go, I've got a few more links as well on the presentation, which I can send to you. And here are the copyright holders of some of the images. And so that's it basically, guys, tonight. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. And I'm going to stop now, and I'm going to, first of all, I'll share the PowerPoint with you. And then I will also, while I'm doing that, I'll give you a chance to ask me any questions.
It was great. Thank you.
You want to ask some question to us? Do you remember true or false?